Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to bring you my ultimate Dragon's Bane analysis video for Hu Tao. I did a ton of math, calculations, and graphing, so I need to share this information that I gathered with you guys today. There's a lot to cover, and make sure to check the timestamps down below. I will try my best to keep it as concise as I can, so if you have any questions about how I did my calculations, feel free to ask that in the comments down below. I won't explain how I did it because it's just going to take too much time. Okay, so firstly, what makes this weapon so appealing is that it will give us a damage boost to enemies that we hit when they are affected by either Hydro or Pyro. This means that our Vaporize reactions are in fact boosted by 20%, but our Melt reactions are not. An extra 20% damage on Vaporize reactions is definitely nothing to scoff at because we can reach such high numbers with it. A 20% boost on 20k hits are much more noticeable than hits for 2k, and a Dragon's Bane at R5 gives us 36% more damage. Now you might be thinking the base attack on the Dragon's Bane is too low, it's not worth it, but that's why I am here and why I did the calculations so that you don't have to. The R1 Dragon's Bane is actually very good when we compare it to the Staff of Homa, even when we have the less than 50% HP buff. This is because the Elemental Mastery really does boost our elemental reaction damage, more specifically our Vaporize damage reactions, to pretty insane levels. Our elemental reaction damage completely outclasses the Staff of Homa, even when the Staff of Homa has a less than 50% HP buff. However, this is the only thing that the Dragon's Bane does well in. If you take a look at its damage when you don't Vaporize, then it is lower than the Staff of Homa, but it's going to depend on whether or not the Staff of Homa has its buffs. So when the Staff of Homa doesn't have its buff, the R1 Dragon's Bane actually does comparable damage even without elemental reactions. And then at R5, it actually just becomes completely negligible and you won't even notice the difference. Naturally, however, this weapon does have a lower crit rate and crit damage multiplier than the Staff of Homa. So when it comes to non-crit damage, the Dragon's Bane does win just by a little bit, and then when it comes to crit damage, the Staff of Homa wins just by a little bit. But since the Dragon's Bane won't be carrying crit rate if you decide to go with a crit damage circlet, the rate in which you hit those crits is going to be much lower than the Staff of Homa. But if you can hit those crits, your elemental reaction damage is going to be a lot more than the Staff of Homa, even when it has the less than 50% HP buff. And so if we just look at the total damage output of the weapon, it is clearly higher than the Staff of Homa, but the thing you have to think about is how often can you hit those crits, because the Dragon's Bane doesn't carry any natural crit damage or crit rate. Since the Staff of Homa carries crit damage as its main stat, you can use a crit rate circlet to get more consistent crit damage. But of course that means sacrificing that high crit damage for more consistency. But this does mean that if you don't have a Staff of Homa, but you have a Dragon's Bane, you can definitely make a build for Hu Tao that is very competitive if you did have the Staff of Homa. And if you have it at R5, that's even better. That elemental reaction damage is seriously going to deal a ton of damage. So Dragon's Bane versus Staff of Homa, your potential damage output is very competitive. This next section takes a look at the Dragon's Bane when we use it with different artifact sets. So I'm going to compare the Dragon's Bane with the 4-piece Crimson Witch set with no set bonus, with the 2-piece Crimson Witch with 2-piece Wanderers, 2-piece Crimson Witch with 2-piece Gladiator, and then with the Lavawalker. So the point of this comparison is to show you how much damage you're missing out when you don't use the Crimson Witch set, because the Crimson Witch set is the de facto best set that you should use, but this will tell you just how much you're missing out when you don't use the 4-piece Crimson Witch set. So starting with the no set bonus, you're going to be dealing about 88.7% of the damage of the 4-piece Crimson Witch set when you deal non-reaction damage, and then when it comes to your Vaporize damage, you're going to be dealing damage at 76.6% of the damage of a 4-piece Crimson Witch set. When you move over to the 2-piece Crimson Witch with the 2-piece Wanderer set, your non-reaction damage is actually going to be the exact same as the 4-piece Crimson Witch set, and then your Vaporize damage is only going to be about 2.5% damage less. So there's not that much of a difference there. If you decide to go with 2-piece Gladiator, your non-reaction damage actually does 4.2% more damage, but your Vaporize damage does about 6.3% less. And then if you decide to go with Lavawalker, your non-reaction damage is going to do 5.3% more damage, and then your vaporized damage is going to be doing 76.6. This is because Lavawalker is not going to boost the damage of your vaporized reactions because the 4-piece set bonus doesn't give you 35% damage when the enemy is affected by Hydro. So your vaporized damage is basically the same as having no artifact bonus at all. So what this basically tells us is that the 4-piece Crimson Witch is the best, but it's not the best by a super long shot. You can definitely go with 2-piece Crimson Witch set with 2-piece Wanderer or 2-piece Gladiator. You are making some slight sacrifices, but it's honestly not that much. Okay, so now here is a chart that dives a little bit more into the Dragon's Bane with the Lavawalker set. I am comparing the Staff of Homa with the Dragon's Bane at R1 and at R5, and you can see that at R1 and at R5 it is dealing very similar damage to an R1 Staff of Homa when we don't have the 50% HP buff. But then obviously when it comes to the less than 50% HP buff, the Staff of Homa clearly wins out. So even if you decide to go Lavawalker and the Dragon's Bane, it's not a terrible weapon if it's able to compete with the Staff of Homa without the buff. But still, the fact is that you are going to be wasting the 221 elemental mastery from the main stat because Lavawalker and Vaporize don't synergize very well. Okay, now this last section, we're going to be taking a look at the Dragon's Bane and our 4-star weapons when they are both at either R1 or R5. So first, starting off with non-reaction damage, the R1 Dragon's Bane performs much better than the Deathmatch and almost the same as the Blackcliff Pole with 3 stacks. And clearly at R5, it's going to beat out every other R1 4-star option. But when everything is at R5, even an R1 Dragon's Bane is dealing just as much damage as an R5 Deathmatch. We can take a closer look here with this chart, and you can see here that the Dragon's Bane will always outperform the Deathmatch. In some cases, it's just by a little, but in reaction damage, it is quite the jump. The R1 Dragon's Bane doesn't quite match up well with the R5 Blackcliff at 2 or 3 stacks, but at R5 it competes very nicely with the Blackcliff at 3 stacks. It performs just slightly below it. We can drill down a bit here, and this chart is for an R1 Blackcliff, and you can see that in all of the cases where there is no reaction damage, the bars are very close to each other. So when we look at vaporized damage, the Dragon's Bane is completely out damaging every 4-star option. Whether at R1 or at R5, Dragon's Bane beats out R5 4-star options. The thing that we have to think about is that all of these calculations were done using a crit damage circlet. So the consistency on the Dragon's Bane crit damage is lower than both the Blackcliff and the Deathmatch because the Blackcliff carries crit damage as its main stat and the Deathmatch carries crit rate as the main stat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap out the crit damage circlet on the Dragon's Bane and swap it in for a crit rate circlet and see how it changes the crit damage output. And when we do that, the gaps start to close a little bit. This is because our vaporized crits are no longer enhanced by a crit damage circlet, but instead we get more consistent crit damage by using a crit rate circlet instead. With this chart, Dragon's Bane at R1 ever so slightly beats the R1 Blackcliff even at 3 stacks, and it still definitely beats the Deathmatch. At R5, it also slightly beats out the Blackcliff with 3 stacks, and completely beats out the Deathmatch. Even at R1, the Dragon's Bane is beating out the Deathmatch. But this stacked graph gives us just the total power output of the weapons. And so instead of using this stacked bar chart, it might be better to break it down by specific attacks and when we actually hit crits or not. And so let's take a look at a non-stacked bar chart. When we don't hit any crits and when we don't create any reactions, all the weapons perform essentially the same. But when we hit crits on our non-reaction damage, both the Blackcliff and the Deathmatch will beat the Dragon's Bane. And then of course when it comes to reactions, the Dragon's Bane comes out on top. This is mostly when we don't hit our crits, because when we do, the R5 Blackcliff Pole versus the R5 Dragon's Bane actually does similar damage. So both this, the charged vaporized crit damage, and this, the burst vaporized crit damage, is only about 4%. It doesn't look that way on this chart because the vaporized damage is a larger number, but at the end of the day, this is only 4% difference. Versus the R5 Deathmatch, you are actually dealing 15% more damage. And then when you compare R1 Dragon's Bane to the R5 Deathmatch, the Dragon's Bane still beats the Deathmatch by 6.6%. So Hu Tao's best 4-star weapons is definitely a choice between the Dragon's Bane and the Blackcliff Pole. Dragon's Bane is probably the wiser choice because you have the potential to consistently hit higher numbers with your vaporized damage. It will also not rely on killing enemies in order to get attack bonus stacks. If you've had the luck and gotten multiple Dragon's Bane from the gacha, it would also be better to use it over refining the Blackcliff Pole so you can save the Star Glitter for characters and character constellations. And lastly, only use the Dragon's Bane in vaporized playstyles because the damage on non-reactions is so close to your other 4-star options. And since the Dragon's Bane lacks any natural crit stats, crit rate is probably your best choice in order to hit those consistent high crit damage numbers. Using the Dragon's Bane in a non-vaporized composition also means that the elemental mastery stat is pretty much wasted. So running the Dragon's Bane in a vaporized comp while she's using any kind of 2-piece Crimson Witch set or 4-piece Crimson Witch set is the way to go. So I hope this video helps you guys decide on whether or not you guys want to run the Dragon's Bane with Hu Tao. And if it did, and if you learned something, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you guys so much if you made it this far, and I will see you guys in the next one.